Hi, welcome to Fuse Interviews. Today I have somebody really special that I want you guys to know, and it's Shahzad, who also goes by the name BrownCarGuy. Shahzad, welcome.
Thank you very much. Great to see you again, man.
It's a pleasure. I think it's been a long time since we've spoken.
Must be. Well, I've been back in the UK 3 years, so probably just before then, I reckon.
And I think a lot has changed since then because I'm now moving into electric vehicles more and more. I've started a firm around electric vehicle conversions. Tell me a little bit about the scene here because you've been to a lot of shows, right? On electric vehicles. What do you think of the electric vehicle space in the UK? What do you think about electric vehicle conversions?
I mean, it's really advanced here. I mean, we've had almost a decade of people actually converting cars. But then there's two aspects of it. Obviously, there's the take up on new cars, which, as you can see from shows like we're at today, this fully charged show, there's a lot of interest. But that's partly to do with the fact that obviously the government has introduced a legislation where 2030 you won't be able to buy petrol or diesel cars. Maybe some hybrid cars, possibly the plug-ins, but that'll be it. Everything else will be electric. So I think a lot of people have now started asking the question, which car should I get? So whereas before people would be thinking about it as a novelty feature, oh, what's these funny little electric cars? I see in the last 12 to 18 months that has moved across to, oh no, I need to get serious about this. I need to find out what these cars are. I need to know how they work. I need to know how I will charge them. I need to know how far I can go in them. So suddenly these questions have become very, very foremost in people's mind. And then on the other side of it, you've got the classic car arena, obviously, where a lot of people are thinking that this is the way to extend the life of their classic cars, to make them live longer, to make them more usable. For example, as we were discussing earlier, I've just recently got an E30, which is a classic car, if you like, but it doesn't qualify as a classic car yet because it needs to be 40 years old in the UK to be classic. So my car is 33 years old. Now the problem I have is I live in London. On the North Circular, I'm right on the edge of the ULEZ zone. The ULEZ zone this year was extended up to the North Circular. Now they're talking about plans to extending that even further. If they do that, I can no longer drive my car, or I'll be paying, I think, £12.50 or £13 a day, even if I just want to move it, and that's obviously extending to other cities here as well. So at that point, a lot of people thinking that if they have classic cars which they intend to use every day or to use quite regularly, then this is a possible option, at a cost of anything from £30,000 up to £100,000 to do that conversion, but extending the life of that vehicle.
Thank you so much for that detailed answer. Here's the thing, just for our viewers, could you explain how the ULEZ zone works?
So the ULEZ zone is the ultra low emission zone, and basically I think it's cars, I might get this wrong, but I think it's cars post 2002, everything is okay, most cars, but there's actually a website where you can go, you can put in the number plate and you can see if your car is ULEZ compliant or not. If it's ULEZ compliant, you can drive into London, you don't pay the ULEZ charge. If it's not ULEZ compliant, then you pay, I think it's £12.50 a day to drive into London. That's on top of the congestion charging, of course, which is also there. And this is a way that cities, big cities, especially in Europe and in the case of London, is a way that they're employing in order to keep the emissions down in the cities. And they have, to be fair, I mean, we're petrol heads, we're car guys, but we have to be honest about it. And they have seen significant health benefits, particularly amongst children in those inner city areas as a result of lowering those emissions. So there are very, very real benefits to be gained from doing this sort of thing, even though as painful as it is for people like us, but the reality is that it does make a difference, So we will be seeing more and more cities adopting that. Obviously, where there is congestion, the chances of emissions are much higher, so obviously those cities are trying to reduce the emissions for the benefit A, of the environment, but B, also for people's health. So you can see why they're doing it. It doesn't really help if you have a classic car and you wish to drive it every day and you don't want to pay, a huge amount of money for it. So in that sense, people are looking at, well, how can I continue to enjoy a classic car? I'll tell you an interesting story. I've done a few of these stories now about these conversions, and I think it was an old Bentley that was being converted in one of these places. And you think, why is somebody converting this old smoker? What's going on here? And the story behind that car was that the owner had that car for a very long time, had a lot of sentimental affection to that car, it really meant something special to him. But now his teenage daughters refused to get into the car because this great big dirty smelly car with a traditional engine. And like, no, then the younger generation are keen to move towards this, environmentally friendly ways of living. So he was at the expense of 40 grand converting that car to electric so that he could take his daughters out in it, so these are the kind of things that people are facing at the moment, and converting cars is possibly one of the solutions to that.
I mean, that's a fantastic story that you have. I didn't know that you have such amazing myriad of reasons for converting classic cars. That's a really unique one, I have to say. But that's not the only one that you've seen. I think you've also been to London Classic Cars, Matthew Quitter's place. I mean, you've seen some of the conversions that are happening. One that actually destined is for Dubai. What did you think about some of the cars that you saw?
Yeah, I mean, he was doing, so I visited him, and I visited Electrogenic, which is in Bicester. And today we were talking to the classic car conversion guys over here as well. And a lot of those, and I've also actually met these guys that were converting Citroën 2CVs, exclusively Citroën 2CVs, using a system that was homologated in France for 2CVs. And you're seeing more and more of these companies popping up and more of these people doing it. And in the case of Matthew, for example, so he's very much London based. I mean, he's in the heart of London. And a lot of his clientele live in London. So they have classic cars which they own and use in London. So we actually went out in his old Land Rover and we were driving around Parliament Square. We were just doing laps of Parliament Square in a Series 1 Land Rover, which had been converted to electric. So he's finding, again, going back to that same thing, that a lot of the people that have these cars want to continue to use them, continue to enjoy them, and the only way to do that is to convert them to electric. And if you only drive around London, your mileage is not that high. So actually the whole thing makes sense. Even the cars aren't even that heavy compared to, say, brand new cars, because they're only changing what's necessary and they're only putting the amount of batteries that they think the customer needs, because they can be tailored to the customer's needs and requirements. So I think in that sense, it just opens it up to all kinds of possibilities. And of course, some people then also enjoy the performance advantage that you get as well. One thing very interesting that Matthew in particularly said, that the whole idea came to him, I think he had a Triumph Stag, if I'm not mistaken, and he was driving that around and he was like, it was great to drive, but every time he stopped, there was petrol fumes and oil fumes and everything would hit him, and he was like, oh, it's a bit smelly. And suddenly with an electric car, you get all the performance, but you don't get that. And also with the conversions that are being done, as opposed to brand new cars, brand new electric cars all have basically 1-speed gearboxes or fully automatic gearboxes. But the conversions can actually continue to maintain the manual gearboxes, which is quite interesting. So therefore, you actually get the experience of driving the car. And I recently, last year, in fact, I reviewed the Porsche 356 by Electrogenic, and they had the manual gearbox. And you think, oh, is that just for show? But no, it actually does work. You can actually drive it up through the ratios, and the performance varies depending on what gear you're in.
That's an interesting one, because I really wanted to ask you about the 356. That was very different from the one that you saw in London electric cars, the Land Rover Defender, because that one is a little bit sportier, I would say. How did that make you feel?
Well, it was interesting because I said that it's probably the fastest the 356, a non-race car 356 has ever been. And of course, it was very, very quick. And that's just in third gear or whatever, if you like. But one of the things they found with that car, and particularly to do with the client that had that conversion done, they actually have several cars. And they're finding that they didn't used to use that car so much, as opposed to now when it's being used regularly, because it's now been converted to electric and it's just easier for them to use. Again, people who have the ability to charge at home, in that way, electric cars make a lot of sense for people. So coming back to new cars, for example, one of the things that they have figured out is that the average commute in the UK is about 23 miles per day. That's pretty much it. So
that's nothing.
It's nothing. And so if you think about when everybody complains about electric car ranges, you go, well, modern cars are giving you 200 to 300 mile ranges. But also, like, if you go down the route of a plug-in hybrid, most plug-ins now are doing 40-mile ranges on electric only. So if you think about it, in a sense, you may never actually use the petrol engine, if you're just going to do your commute and you're just going to keep it at home plugged in the whole time. The other thing about plugging in, I should also mention, again, because of how, and I'm sure that you've met many of the people here that are providing charging solutions, both domestic and commercial, but I'm sure you've learned this as well, is that much of this is now smart charging. So people feel like, oh, I plug the car in and I'm paying the bill. But actually what's happening is that these charging systems are finding the optimum time to charge up the cars. So they're using off-peak hours and stuff like that. So I spoke to one guy last year, and he had reduced his annual fuel bill from £1,500 a year to £125.
That's insane. That's a crazy number. That's over 90%. Over 90%.
But that of course was through clever charging. I mean, I've reviewed electric cars here, and to be fair, if you take it to a public charging point, I found sometimes it takes almost as much money as it does to fill in with a tank of fuel. But obviously, if you have a home charger, then it's different, because then it uses off-peak tariffs, and it's very clever about how it does it. So if you do it that way, yeah, your savings can be quite significant.
I mean, there's so much of an ecosystem around these things. So once you get into it, I mean, the amount of solutions that are available, especially technology-based, is incredible. And I think I'm seeing that as a lot of ways. The thing I find interesting about electric car conversions is that they're kind of bringing in both that old school feel along with the new aspect of the drivetrain and the powertrain and all that. And I think that kind of what you call the balance of it it helps a lot. Do you think that that's something that will remain a niche market?
No, I think it's a growing market, and I think the evidence is there from what we've seen, because the number of people now that are doing this in this market alone. I mean, yes, this is a very well developed classic car market. It's an industry worth millions here, but more and more players are coming into that arena alone, where they're just focusing on converting classics. So I think that whilst we may perceive it as a niche market, I don't think it will continue to stay a niche market. I think it will grow, and I think that as more and more people are trying to get old cars and keep them alive, and I mean, let's be honest, we're living in an environment now where modern cars are great, but a lot of people feel that older cars have more character, more personality, and more engagement. But they're becoming harder and harder to live with, because fuel is going to become more difficult. Legislation and taxation is making it more expensive. So the answer then becomes, okay, well, let's convert it to. With some cars, that may be a no-no, because cars where the engines are often the soul of the car, so say some Ferraris or muscle cars or stuff like that. But having said that, I mean, there's a company here called Charge Cars, which are basically recreating the 1967 Mustang Fastback as an electric car. And we saw it at Salon Preve a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lot of interest in that car. So I think that it's going to continue to grow, and I think there's going to be a lot more interest in it. And I think that as that continues to happen, as it becomes harder and more expensive to fuel your car, I think that's going to grow globally as well.
I mean, your insights from seeing what it is in the UK kind of holds well for the rest of the world, because they're quite ahead. Thank you so much for that peek into the future, as they say. And thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure catching up with you.
Awesome, Salman. Great to see you again, man.
Thanks.